Hi everybody, it's Amy again at The Legal Path on the lawcareers.net YouTube channel, bringing you a new video. This video is going to be on rejection and how I see that as a redirection, and this is coming from much experience. Sadly, the majority of us will face rejection during this process. Securing a training contract or subsequently legal experience if you're doing the SQE route is really one of the most competitive processes there are. So with that comes rejection. So we have to become familiar and desensitized in some respects to rejection, because we can't let rejection get us down. Rejection very much is a redirection, and I'm going to tend to look at some of my personal experiences and how I use those rejections to redirect me to where I am today. So touching on my first ever experience of rejection in this career sector. So before I secured my training contract and subsequently received many rejections, I hadn't actually really experienced rejection in its full intensity. So I passed my driving test, I got the A-levels that I wanted, I went to the university that I really wanted to go to. I hadn't really faced any sort of setback. And I say setback really sort of delicately, because those things, not getting those things is not a setback, but it does give you that sense of immediate panic. What do I do now? And then you have to use that rejection, that setback, to redirect you to the route that you need to go down to where you're supposed to be. So for me, the idea of not doing something right first time, which is quite funny to say because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, but also actually not securing something when I applied the first time. So I remember I applied to McDonald's. I used to work as a shift manager at McDonald's, and I've used that experience a lot during these videos, but I used to work as a shift manager at McDonald's, and I applied the very first time when I was just turning 16 and secured the job. So every job I'd applied to at that point, I'd secured. So I remember getting my first ever rejection from a law firm, and I can't even say exactly when it was. I remember exactly where I was. I was in the library. This was my third year of university. I somewhat felt already a bit behind the curve, because a lot of my friends who were going into third year had secured training contracts, but I wasn't really clear on the process and the fact that we could actually apply in the penultimate year. So I was in the library and I'd applied to a law firm, and I just got the very generic, the very standard, unfortunately on this occasion. And I remember reading those 3 words and I was like, what? I have not been successful. What have I done wrong? It must be something I've done. It was my personality maybe. It can't possibly be that the application wasn't good enough because I'd spent so much time on it. A little secret for you. I now know that the application was terrible, because I reviewed that application when I first secured my training contract just to see how far I'd come, and it was really bad. So when I say that this process sort of grows you, not just as a person, it makes you more resilient and determined, but it actually grows you in terms of an applicant. And yeah, I called my mum, I got really upset. I was like, that's it, I'm not gonna be a lawyer. I don't know what on earth I'm gonna do. And she was like, this is the first time you've applied. There are lots of other applications out there still, because I'd done quite a few, but took the advice to sort of not put all my eggs in one basket. We'll look at these ones, see how they go. And if it's not your year, it's not your year, we'll just get back on the horse. And what you guys will start to see is that's very much a common theme here, is getting back on the horse, not letting it set you back, not letting it get you down. You've always got to just get back on that horse and keep going towards where you want to be. So yes, my first experience of rejection was really tough, and I found it really difficult to process that rejection. Not only did I make it personal about me, which this whole process is not personal, and you really have to get that into perspective. It's very unusual that your feedback is anything to do with you as a person. It's usually to do with the strength of your application, the fact that you're not relying and bringing from those experiences and those skills that you have, and aligning them with what the firm is looking for, and actually that you're not utilising your work experience in the best way. So you're trying to give more weight to legal work experience where you may have not had a great deal of exposure to legal work, and instead did quite administrative tasks, and not actually pulling from those experiences, whether legal or non-legal, which really have developed those transferable skills. And we'll come on to that in a later video. Anyway, enough about antidotes and sad stories about me and my rejection, which I wanted to share with you. Obviously now I'm extremely fortunate that those things didn't play out the way they did, because I'm absolutely loving my time as a trainee at my firm. I couldn't imagine training anywhere else. The people, the clients, the experience I've had to date and the values that firm have very much are amazing and resonate with exactly what I was looking for a career. So that's that. We're now going to touch on my 5 top tips for dealing with rejection. So that brings me to my first tip. So my first tip of today's video in how to deal with rejection is to take time for you after you face rejection. And again, this is coming from my own experience. So personally, I didn't take any time. As soon as I faced rejection, I was like, okay, right, I'm going to just get to the next one. And yes, I say this very lightly because actually there is an element of the process is continuous. It never stops. It's like a rotating, I don't know, luggage carousel. It's never going to stop unless you physically stop it yourself. And there are times in this process where you do need to step in and stop it yourself. For instance, at the end of the recruitment cycle, you might decide it's actually time for me to take some time for myself. You'll have a break between applications ending and training contracts being offered, and then applications opening again. So taking time for you, that's important, and you can do that in whatever way that you think is comfortable. So maybe it's just that you decide, I'm not going to look at applications, I'm not going to look at anything law related for a little while, just going to have a short break. I'm on summer holidays, and I'm just going to switch off. So tip number 2 is making sure to reflect on your experience, reflect on how far you've come, reflect on what you think you've done really well, and reflect on the things that you may do differently next time. Making yourself personally accountable in this process is vitally important. There's no guarantee that regardless of the stage that you're at, you'll get any feedback from the firm. So it is down to you to really reflect on the process and dive into those things that you think you've done really well, dive into the things that you maybe would do differently, and actually put yourself on the outside. If I wasn't Amy and I was a recruiter looking at this application form, what things would I naturally pick out as being not so strong, and what things would I think, actually, that's a really good point that I've made, but actually I could go a bit further. Tip number 3. Tip number 3 is really important one, and I think a lot of candidates forget this. And again, it comes down to the fact that the process is continuous, and we do have to just sort of try and put the process and the rejections to one side, and continue with it. And my tip number 3 is actually remind yourself how far you have come in the process. And actually, if you create a physical diagram, so what I did was a lot of the time I would have like a spreadsheet with all my firms that I'd applied to, and I actually colour coordinated exactly where they were in the process. So for instance, if red, if I had not been successful following the application form, orange, if I was sort of climbing up the process, so for instance, the verbal reasoning test, and then I finally turned 2 of my applications to green to say that I'd secured the VAC schemes and subsequently secured the training contract. And actually, that was a really good way of visualising my progress. And upon reflection now, it's so easy just to focus on the fact that I got my training contract and that's great. And we sometimes forget how far we've had to come to get to that point. But actually going back on that spreadsheet is a really good way of me to visualize actually how I developed as a candidate, because over the 3 years, a lot of those reds and oranges got further up the chain to maybe all oranges and subsequently a couple of greens. So being able to check how far you've come is super important. Tip number 4, we're flying through them now. Tip number 4 is to always have another application out there, at least up until the end of the application process, especially if it's getting to sort of June, July space where we know a lot of the outcomes are being issued. And what I mean by that is it's always important, if you have got a number of firms that you are applying to, that are firms that you really want to work at, by having another application out there, whilst the rejection is always difficult, it can sort of allow you to refocus, and you have to refocus a little bit quicker if you know that the process is still ongoing for other applications. So by always having an application out there, you can always try to make sure that you've got something else to continue to focus on, so that you don't focus too much on the rejection for this particular firm. And tip number 5, and the most important tip, and something that I've been harping on about this entire video, is remember that rejection is not a setback. Rejection is a redirection to exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm not saying that the firm, if it rejects you, is not the right firm for you, because actually a lot of people will be rejected from the firms they end up applying to and subsequently being successful with. What I'm saying is it might not be the right time for you. You will develop further as you continue across the process. So whilst it's not nice to face rejection, it's not something that we can't learn from. It will allow us to develop our character, to develop us as an applicant, and we'll need those skills when we are successful in the profession. You know, I'm much more resilient because of the rejections I faced across the application process. So redirection comes from a rejection, and it's being able to look at that rejection in a positive way, which is very difficult at the time, but upon reflection you'll be able to go, I know that it wasn't the right time for me, or I know that that wasn't the right environment for me, and actually you'll end up exactly where you're supposed to be if you continue to be dedicated, determined and driven. So rejection should never be seen as a negative thing. Rejection is a positive thing because it will redirect us to where we're supposed to be. So trying to have that mentality and alleviating the stress and the pressure that you put on yourself is super, super important. You are not in control of this entire process. There are elements of this that's outside of our control, and there's nothing that any of us can do about that. But what we are in control of is trying to give our best to every aspect of the process, making sure that we don't think ahead of the process. So keeping it into perspective is extremely important, because that will allow us to take it step by step and can celebrate the sort of smaller wins as opposed to looking at the future win. And by doing that, what you're able to do is to make sure that this process, as difficult as it can be, is you alleviate a lot of the pressure from you and you enjoy it as much as possible. And I say enjoy. The process is never enjoyable, as we all know. It's quite difficult, but actually I started to really enjoy the process come my 3rd cycle, when I'd learned a lot from those rejections, and I developed as a character a lot better. And you'll become quite familiar, unfortunately, in this process with rejections, but the way that you deal with rejections will be really, really important. And as you grow, you'll start to deal with them in a much more beneficial way. So that is it. They're my 5 top tips on how to deal with rejection. I hope you found this video helpful. I'd really be interested to hear your top tips for how you've dealt with your own experiences of rejection. So please do pop them in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.